May's mother was Japanese until just a few years ago when her grandfather passed away. One of their family pastimes was sitting together and listening to Japanese horror stories that her grandfather used to tell. Legends like Kuchisake Onna, a woman with a slit mouth who would either kill her victims or slit their mouths like hers. Teke, a woman whose body had been split in half by a train, and when she approached her victims, the sound of her body being dragged on the ground would reach their ears, and other stories, but among all of them, May feared one more than any other. Noperapo, a spirit that had no facial features. Noperapo would first appear as one of their friends or acquaintances, but gradually change its face and reveal its faceless form. This was the first reason that terrified May about Noperapo. But the second reason was much more important. Her grandfather was a farmer and worked on the rice paddy he had inherited. He was an active man, and even on holidays when no one else came to work, he would be working on the paddy. One of these holidays, near dusk, when he had finished his work, he noticed someone's presence. It was his wife, who was standing not too far away in silence. May's grandmother used to bring her husband's meal to the rice paddy every afternoon, and they would eat together, but it had never happened on a holiday, especially not at dusk. Furthermore, where she was standing was exactly opposite the path to their house. Her grandfather had heard the legend of Noperapo and knew that the person standing in front of him was not his wife. For this reason, he decided to return home, but along the way, he realized that she was following him too. The sun was setting, and her grandfather could see the shadow of the woman behind him on the ground. He realized that the shadow of the woman was getting thinner and stretching. Her grandfather was scared and didn't have the courage to look behind him. Instead, he started running and made it home. When he arrived home, his wife was cooking, surprised by his frightened face. This incident actually happened to her grandfather. And that's why when it came to telling scary stories at the nighttime party at the Hilltop house, she had described this, unaware that the scariest story of her life would begin after that night. When the clock's bell rang in one of the rooms on the second floor, May was having a heated argument with her mother over the phone. Her parents, who were very traditional, strongly opposed her relationship with Lisa. That night, despite her mother's threats to disown her, May chose Lisa over her family. Tears were the only thing that could bring her a little peace at that moment, but the laughter that followed moments later, filled with mockery, put an end to her tears. In the dimly lit hallway, a young girl stood, seemingly amused and mocking. May, wiping away her tears, was taken aback when she saw the girl's face clearly. It was Sarah, her closest friend and roommate. Sarah's indifferent smile in the face of May's distress was completely out of character. May was certain she had seen Sarah in that moment, even though Sarah claimed not to remember going upstairs due to being intoxicated. However, neither of them was mistaken, for the girl standing before them was not truly Sarah, but a mere reflection of her appearance. They would only discover this truth weeks later, on the night when Sarah would come face to face with the source of the cries and moans she had been hearing since the party. From childhood, Sarah had been deeply terrified of the legend of La Llorona. To her, a mother driven to the brink of madness, resorting to murdering her own children, was the most terrifying creature imaginable. She had recounted this chilling tale at the Hilltop house, and now she believed she could hear the cries of that tormented woman herself. On this particular night, Sarah found herself alone in the house. Intent on drawing the curtains of her room and retiring to bed, she noticed something peculiar. Among the rustling branches of a tree that extended up to the window of Sarah's second-floor room, a figure with human-like features stood in the middle of the alleyway. The figure lifted its head and stared directly into Sarah's room. As the wind continued to rustle the branches and the darkness of the alley obscured Sarah's view, she decided to use the video intercom in the house. Turning on the camera, she hoped to get a clearer look at what was happening outside her window. In the noisy and somewhat distorted image on the intercom, something caught her attention. Initially, she thought it was just a part of the shadow cast by the tree in front of the house, extending into the middle of the alley, but she quickly realized her mistake. It was a woman lurking within the shadows. The woman had been staring at the second-floor window all along, and now she shifted her gaze to the intercom, as if aware that Sarah was watching her. But that wasn't all. Among the wind noise on the intercom, Sarah heard another sound, a muffled, indistinct wailing that seemed to be pleading for her children. It was a sound she had heard before. She intended to turn off the intercom, but something caught her eye. She couldn't discern if it was due to image noise or the unknown woman emerging from the shadows and approaching the intercom. Fear gripped her. She hastily placed the phone down to deactivate the camera's feed. Yet when she turned away to leave the room, she noticed the monitor turning on by itself. When she glanced back at the monitor, she froze in horror. The screen filled entirely with the image of a woman's eye, rapidly rotating as if searching for Sarah. Shocked, Sarah stared in a mixture of fear and astonishment, slowly backing away from the intercom. Suddenly, a hand rested on her shoulder. She let out a piercing scream and stumbled backward, only to realize it was May, who had returned from her trip. May had witnessed Sarah's horrified expression as she stared at the intercom and, unable to get her attention, had approached her. Sarah, trembling with terror, turned her gaze back to the intercom, but there was no trace of what she had seen. But she couldn't ignore it, especially since that night she found out she wasn't the only one having such hallucinations. May was returning from Lisa's, who had been experiencing sightings of a blind old woman even during her waking hours. Lisa had shared her story at the party, and May couldn't help but draw a connection to her own experiences. She was now certain that the woman she had encountered a few nights ago, following her from the bus and chasing her near her home, was not her mother. But both of them were one thing, noparapo. Were all these events merely coincidences? Perhaps someone could provide answers, and May thought of Daniel. May had met Daniel 2 months prior at one of the anger management sessions. They quickly became friends, and Daniel had invited May to a friendly gathering at a large, welcoming house known as the Hilltop House. May had taken the opportunity to invite some of her own friends, making the party livelier and even celebrating her new partner's birthday. However, certain details from that night started to resurface in May's memory. She recalled that Daniel was the only person who had left the Hilltop House before midnight. Moreover, she vividly remembered the scary story he had told around the fire, and May remembered it well. The story of a house that everyone who entered it would be cursed. The call was exactly what Daniel had been expecting. It was the perfect opportunity for him to execute his plan by luring May to the abandoned Hilltop House, and he succeeded. But when, despite his insistence on May coming alone, he saw Sarah accompanying her, he temporarily refrained from killing May. This was something Daniel later confessed, and Sam had understood through the officers who had come to arrest his sister. That's why when May and Sarah arrived at the Hilltop House, the door was open, but there was no trace of Daniel. May and Sarah didn't have the courage to enter the house, so they waited in the car. Daniel's phone was off and his calls went unanswered, but something happened that made May get out of the car and walk towards Daniel, whom she had seen entering the house. Sarah stared at May in amazement, as she was sure Daniel wasn't there. She quickly took out the knife she had brought for precaution from her bag and hurriedly went towards the house to tell May that what she saw as Daniel was not real, but rather the faceless monster she had always feared. Sarah was right. When she entered the house, terrified screams and cries echoed throughout the building. Sarah's fear was no less than May's. Her body was shaking, but she had to save her best friend. So, she went straight to the basement from where May's voice was coming. When Sarah entered the basement, it was completely silent. Only Sarah's voice echoed in the closed space as she tried to reassure May. But there was no trace of her. Something caught Sarah's attention. The door of an old wooden closet at the end of the basement was slowly opening. When Sarah reached the closet, the door was half open. In the dark space inside the closet, she could make out a shadowy figure sitting huddled in the corner, crying softly with fear. Sarah asked her to leave the house as soon as possible, but the woman who emerged from the closet on all fours was not May. It was Sarah's most terrifying nightmare coming towards her. Sarah was paralyzed with fear and unable to move. But when she felt the woman's hands on her body, in a state of fear and madness, she attacked the woman with the knife. When Sarah came to her senses, contrary to her delusion, it was May who was taking her last breaths, while her throat was completely severed due to Sarah's mad blows. Sarah had held her friend's body in her arms for hours and couldn't leave her alone. But Sarah's tears and protests were of no use. May was dead. Gradually, her logic overtook her emotions. Sarah now only thought of one thing: no one will believe his words regarding May's murder, and she will be punished for a crime she committed unconsciously. So, she decided to hide her secret forever. She returned the body to the closet and, to prevent its identification, burned it with acid she had found in the basement's tool room. She locked the basement and, after hiding the key in May's car, returned home. Since that night, everything had changed for Sarah, even her nightmares. 2 nights after May's murder, like the nights before, she was sitting on her bed and crying for her best friend, whom she had no intention of killing, when she heard a sound. It was the sound of her clothes closet opening slowly. Sarah wiped away her tears and stared in amazement into the darkness inside the closet. In that same darkness, she could see a figure looming among her clothes, as if someone was stalking her. Shortly after, in front of Sarah's horrifides, something emerged from the closet. Contrary to the past, it was a burnt and faceless corpse coming out of the closet, moving toward Sarah, while a strange sound emanated from its severed throat. Sarah's escape and her return to her father's house hadn't changed anything, and now, after several months, Sarah couldn't bear the guilt and her nightmares anymore. She decided to end her suffering by hanging herself, but she didn't know one thing: some things don't end, even with death. Sarah had spilled the blood of an innocent girl, and where the blood of an innocent is shed, a curse is born.